This video goes along with task sheet 842. I'm talking about fuel injector testing. And what they're having us do in the task sheet, they're going to have us do some resistance checks on the fuel injectors, and we're going to do something that's called a injector balance test or an injector drop test. So basically what we're going to do on that, we need a scan tool. I have a Snap-on Versus right here that we're going to use, and I'll kind of walk you guys through, to get to the right spot for doing this. And basically what this does is it's a special function. You can go in and command each injector to pulse. So every time you go and command an injector, it's going to turn the fuel pump on for a prime, and then it's going to cycle the injector for a specified period of time. And we're going to want to already have our fuel pressure gauge hooked up to this, because what happens is we want to record the pressure that we start at. So we need to write that down, and then we need to pulse the injector, and we need to write down what we ended with. And you're going to subtract, and what we want to end up with is how much pressure we lost, what our drop was when we pulse that injector. I'm probably only going to do one or two, but if you're doing this in the field, you're going to want to do all of them, and you're going to want to write all of those down and compare them to one another. What you're looking for is kind of an oddball out. They should all be pretty close to one another. So you may need to compare this to a specification, but if you dropped 20 pounds, or just an example, it's probably more like 5 or something like that, but say you drop 5 pounds on 7 out of 8 injectors, and you dropped 2 pounds on one or 15 pounds on another. So if it's dropping too much, you got one that's probably maybe a little leaky, or it's flowing too much, or if you have one that's not enough, you probably got a restriction in that fuel injector. So if we don't have a spec, just we're kind of looking for the one that doesn't look right. So I'll probably test one or two on this thing. I'm not going to do all of them. Another thing to note is most of the time on these scan tools, they'll only let you do it once per ignition cycle. And a lot of times if you pulse it once, it's not going to let you do it again until you turn the key off, and probably turn your scan tool off and let everything sit for 5 minutes and power down, and then it'll eventually let you do it again. But they're going to lock you out of doing it over and over again. So we'll go over to the truck, and we'll see what kind of readings we get. All right, so we got our scan tool hooked up. I apologize for the glare. I've been trying to figure out how to not get a glare on this the entire last class, and I just can't. So sorry, but you gotta deal with it. So here's our scanner. So we're going to, this is our home screen. So we're gonna go through the scanner. If you try and go through the generic OBD2, it's not going to give you the special functions that you need. So we actually need to build out our vehicle. So it's a GMC. We are a 99 pickup, a 5.3. I'll load that vehicle. We are under 8,600. No air pump. I want to go to engine. We already have our cable hooked up underneath the dash. All right, so we have a couple different places that we could go: functional tests or generic functions. I want to say it's in generic functions on this truck, but let's see. It is not. So we'll go back one. Functional tests. There's injector balance. I'm going to continue. Can only do this once. So we've got our fuel gauge hooked up. Let's see that back there. We're going to select an injector. We had a prime. Now it's going to ask us to continue. So we need to write down that 52 or so PSI. We're going to cycle our injector. So 48, about what, 12 pounds or so we dropped. I don't know if you guys could hear that injector cycle, but that's what you want it to sound like. But we're gonna write that down, and then we're gonna go back and we can continue and do each of these injectors. Like I said, I'm not gonna do all of them. I'll do 2 of them here. So we're gonna go to injector 2. There's our prime. Record our starting pressure. It's getting about 52, 53 pounds. And we're ready to record our drop as soon as I hit continue. So we got about the same, about 12, 13 PSI dropped. So that's good. We want them to all be pretty similar to one another. But this is a V8. You'd want to do all of them. 4-cylinder, you're going to do 4. But that's what we're looking for. We want nice, nice even drops. And we want the same side to side. So next, it's going to ask us to measure resistance on these fuel injectors. So we'll get the meter out and we'll see what we got going. All right, so we are back over to the truck. It's kind of hard to see, but here is one of our connectors for our fuel injector. We've got our rail right here. Here's another one right here, and on down the line we got another one back there and one more, same on the other side. So this one's easiest to get to, so we're gonna start there. Got that unplugged. And when we're measuring resistance of a fuel injector, we want to make sure that we're measuring on the component itself. So we need to be down on those 2 terminals right there. So I wanted to take a second to talk about these tools that I have. I've been using these for a really long time, and I really recommend them if you're going to be doing much electrical work. These are terminal test probes, and these are aftermarket ones. We did have factory ones from General Motors and the dealers that we would use, but these are some of the just common sizes, especially for like computer control stuff. But these have both the male and female sides, so you can use use them for a fair amount of things. And there's 4 different terminal styles. So that's what I have hooked up right now. So you can see those in there, and they've got these little brass plugs that go in the end. If you need to make a jumper, you could do that too. But they're really nice for testing. Not necessarily as important for what we're doing right now on a component. I'm just doing it so I can have a free hand, because you could just touch off your leads to those terminals down in there. But where it's more important is the harness side. So if we thought we had a problem on the harness side, or we wanted to test on the harness side, we can do that without worrying about damaging these terminals, because they're so small these days and delicate. We can get in there and probe them without hurting them at all. And there's another thing too about these terminals. It's called terminal tension. So sometimes, especially on these real small ones, there's like a little tab in there that makes contact with the terminal down here in the injector. And that thing can get bent, and it just won't make very good contact. So if you put one of those probes in there and you really don't feel any kind of resistance, or if you can flip over this connector and that probe will just fall out, then you got a terminal problem in there. So these things are handy in more than one way. But we're gonna get our meter hooked up and measure resistance to that injector real quick. So I got my leads hooked up here. One thing to note, anytime you're doing testing, and especially if you're using these probes, have these little brass ends, you wanna make sure they're not touching off to anything metal, so you're not getting any kind of, like if these were both touched off to this bracket down here or something, you may not get an accurate reading. So we need to make sure those were isolated. This one's just hanging in the breeze, and this one's touching plastic, so we know we're good there. And if you are just using our test probes and using your hands, make sure that you're not touching both of the metal leads at the same time, because that will mess with your reading too, just going across your skin. So we got this hooked up. Here's our reading. We're at 13.7. Oh, something went crazy here. I had a little bit of a loose connection right there, but if I hold on to that, we got 13.1 on this injector, which I believe is in specification. So if you guys want to try and look up the spec on this, again, 99 GMC Sierra, 2500 with a 5.3. or you can look and see if you can get a spec on your car. Either way, I'm not going to go and do all of these. They should all be pretty close to being the same. So that's going to wrap us up for this task sheet, and get that filled out the best you can, and that'll wrap us up for today. Thanks.